The building woke before the people in it did. That was the part nobody toured, the part I loved most. At 0430, the corridors of the command headquarters held nothing but the hum of the air handlers and the low green light of the monitors on the operations floor and my footsteps and the smell of old coffee that no amount of new coffee ever fully replaced. I signed the watch log the way I had signed it every morning for 2 years, my initials in the same blue ink, and the sailor of the watch, who was actually a soldier, but whom everyone teased with the Navy word because he had transferred in from a joint billet, slid the clipboard back to me and said, "Good morning, ma'am," and the day began. I want you to understand the woman who signed that log, because in a few hours my own mother would look a 19-year-old guard in the eye and tell him I was no one, and he would believe her, and I would let him. My name is Adele Renner. I am 44 years old. I have worn the uniform of the United States Army for 22 years, and for the last 2 of them, I have commanded the military intelligence brigade that runs the secure command and analysis facility on this post. That sentence took me a long time to be able to say plainly, without softening it, without folding it into something smaller so that it would not seem like bragging. The building has my name on its authorities. When the floor holds, it holds on my signature. When a decision has to be made at 3 a.m. about something I am not allowed to describe to you, the phone that rings is mine. None of that is the kind of thing you can say at a dinner table. I learned that a long time ago. So I stopped saying it. There is a particular kind of love you develop for a place that only exists when no one is watching it. Most people who came through the doors that day would see a lobby, a fountain, a wall of photographs, a polite officer pointing them toward the restrooms. They would never see the floor. They were not meant to. The floor is a low, cool room with no windows, lit the color of a fish tank, where a dozen people at a time sit in front of screens and do the slow, exacting, mostly invisible work of noticing things before those things become emergencies. It is quiet in there, the way a library is quiet, except that the silence has weight, because everyone in it knows what the silence is holding back. I had spent my whole career learning to sit inside that silence without flinching. As a young lieutenant, I had been fast and clever and wrong just often enough to be dangerous. The Army spent 20 years sanding the fast and the clever down into something steadier, and what it left me with was patience, which is the only real weapon in that room. You learn to wait. You learn that the worst instinct in a crisis is the need to be seen doing something. You learn to be the still point that other people can steer by, and you learn that being the still point means no one ever sees the effort it costs, because the whole job is to make the effort invisible. There had been nights the floor did not hold easily. I will not describe them, but I will tell you they existed, and that on the worst of them I had stood behind a row of chairs for 11 hours without sitting down, saying almost nothing, making 3 decisions that mattered and 100 that did not, and had walked out at dawn into a parking lot and sat in my car and let my hands shake for 10 minutes before I trusted them on the wheel. No one knew. That is not a complaint. That is the design. The people who do this work are known to almost no one. And the day we are known is usually the day something has gone very wrong. So when I tell you the building woke before the people in it did, and that I loved that hour most, understand what I am telling you. I loved being the person the place could count on before it had to perform for anyone. I loved the version of myself that existed at 0430, competent and unwitnessed, and enough. It was the only place in my life where I never once had to explain who I was, because the work already knew. The morning of the open house, I walked the floor once before the sun came up, the way I always did. My deputy, Lieutenant Colonel Marisol Kang, was already there, because she was always already there. A woman who ran on 4 hours of sleep and an unreasonable faith in checklists. She handed me a paper cup and did not say good morning, because we had reached the stage of a working partnership where good morning was implied. "Family day," she said in the tone of a woman announcing a minor weather event. "Concourse opens at 10, tours of the unclassified spaces at 11 and 1. You're the friendly face at the ribbon. I am nobody's friendly face. You're the colonel. That makes you the friendly face by regulation." She almost smiled. "There's a note in your box from the watch. Nothing hot, just a maybe." A maybe, in our line of work, meant an item on the floor that might resolve on its own, or might, without warning, become the only thing in the world. I read the note. I folded it into my breast pocket. I kept walking. Let me tell you about the badge, because the badge is the whole hinge of the day, and most people have no idea such a thing exists. Every person who works in a building like that carries a credential, and every credential lives at a level. and the levels are not a courtesy. They are the architecture. A visitor badge opens nothing and beeps politely. A staff badge opens the doors that person is cleared for and nothing else. And then there is a small handful of credentials, 3 or 4 in the whole building, that live at the top of the system, the tier that can not only open the secure spine, but, under the right conditions, seal it. Mine was one of them. It had been enrolled the week I took command in a windowless office by a technician who made me test it 4 times and then had me sign a form acknowledging what it could do. What it could do, among other things, was trip a protective hold. If a top-tier credential is used in an unexpected way at an unexpected reader during a period when the watch floor is already leaning forward, the system is built to assume the worst and lock down around it, on the theory that it is better to seal a building for nothing than to fail to seal it once. It is the kind of safeguard you hope to live your entire career without ever seeing outside of a drill. I had seen it in exactly 2 drills. I had never once seen it in the world. I knew all of this the way you know the layout of your own house in the dark. I could have told you, standing at that fountain with my mother on my arm, precisely what my card would do if I badged in at the visitor lane while the floor was recalling me. I want you to hold on to that, because later, when I pressed my badge to the glass, I want you to understand that I was not surprised by what happened. I chose it. I knew exactly which sound the reader would make, and I made it make that sound on purpose, in front of everyone, because I was done being the only person in the building who had to pretend she did not know her own weight. That is the strange arithmetic of a job like mine. The more important the work, the less you're allowed to say about it, until you arrive at a place where your importance and your silence are the same size, and the people closest to you read the silence as absence. My mother thought I did scheduling. In a way, I had let the whole architecture of my life become a machine for keeping her comfortable in that belief. And so I want you to picture the woman at the ribbon that morning, because there were 2 of her, and only one of them was visible. There was the friendly colonel shaking hands and pointing toward the restrooms and letting her mother describe her work as forgivable. And underneath that one, running the whole time like a second track beneath a song, there was the commander, feeling the note in her breast pocket the way you feel a stone in your shoe, tracking the floor by instinct, doing the private arithmetic of a maybe that might at any second become the only thing in the world. I have spent so many years running those 2 tracks at once that I can do it in my sleep, and have. It is the great unspoken skill of the job, the ability to be fully present at a family table while a corner of your mind never leaves the watch floor. And it is also, I have come to believe, part of what made me so easy to misread. People who saw me at family events saw a woman who seemed half somewhere else, and they were right, and they filled in the somewhere else with the worst available explanation. She thinks she is too important for us. The truth was less flattering to them and less damning to me. I was somewhere else, because somewhere else people's lives depended on my attention, and I could not say so, and the not saying looked exactly like disdain. I tell you all of this so you will feel the size of the gap. Because at 10 o'clock, the doors opened and the concourse filled with strollers and grandparents and teenagers on their phones, and among them, arriving on the passes I had arranged myself, came my mother and my sister, and the woman who had commanded that building for 2 years became, in the space of one glance from the woman who raised her, a person in the way. My mother is named Carol. She is 71 years old, and she is small the way a bird is small, quick and certain, and impossible to argue with. And she has spent my entire life being sure of things. She was sure that my sister Bethany, 3 years younger and warmer in all the ways that show, was the one who would stay close. She was sure that I was the difficult one, the cold one, the one who did not call enough and did not explain herself, and always had a reason no one was allowed to check. And she was sure, that morning, that the woman standing near the entry control point in a plain duty uniform was staff, some anonymous functionary whose job was to keep the line moving so that the important part of the day could begin. I had not told her I would be there in uniform. I had not told her much of anything, for years, and that was my doing as much as hers, and I will get to that. The entry control point of the command headquarters is not a dramatic place to look at. It is a set of glass doors, a bank of badge readers, a low counter, and a lane marked off with retractable belts for the days when a crowd has to be funneled through. On an ordinary day, 2 soldiers stand there and wave people through with the bored courtesy of anyone who checks credentials for a living. On family day, we had augmented the post, which meant a handful of young soldiers borrowed from other units to help manage the flow. Soldiers who did not know the building and did not know its people, and had been told, correctly, to keep unescorted individuals from loitering near the restricted lanes. One of them was a specialist named Wesley Tarrant. He was 19. I know that now. That morning I knew only that he was young and nervous and holding a clipboard like it might protect him. The line had backed up. Somewhere ahead, a stroller had jammed in the belts, and a grandfather was patting his pockets for a pass he had already handed over, and the crowd had done the thing crowds do, compressing and grumbling, and my mother, near the front of it with Bethany at her elbow, had reached the end of her patience. I had come down from the floor to meet them, to walk them in myself, and I had come up on the group from the side so that when my mother turned, she saw me not as her daughter arriving, but as one more uniform materializing in her path. "Finally," she said. "Can you do something about this? We have been standing here for 10 minutes. "Mom," I said. She was already turning to the young guard, already lifting her hand toward me the way you shoo a waiter you have decided is incompetent. "This one keeps standing in the way," she told him, meaning me, and her voice was pitched to carry because my mother has never in her life lowered her voice for anything. "Move her along, would you? She's no one. She's holding up the people who matter." I want to be precise about what happened in me because I have thought about it many times since. I did not feel rage. Rage would have been easier, cleaner, a thing with edges. What I felt was the old, familiar folding, the reflex of 20 years, the muscle I had built so well that it moved before I could choose. I made myself smaller. I stepped back. I let the space I had been standing in close over, and I watched a 19-year-old boy look from my mother to me and decide, reasonably, that the woman who spoke with such certainty must be right, and that the woman who said nothing must be no one. "Ma'am," he said to me, gently, because he was not cruel, only young. "I'll need you to keep moving, please." "Of course," I said, and I stepped aside. You are probably wondering why a woman who could seal that building with the press of a card would step aside for a boy with a clipboard because her mother told him to. I have wondered too. The answer lives 20 years back, and it does not flatter anyone, least of all me. When I was young, before any of this, my family had already decided who I was. Bethany was the son. She laughed easily and cried easily and needed things out loud, and my parents knew how to love that because it asked to be loved plainly. I was the other kind, quiet, watchful, better at leaving than at staying. My father, Gerald, used to say I was born with my bags packed. He did not mean it unkindly. It became unkind slowly, the way water shapes stone, one repetition at a time. Let me give you the shape of it, because the difficult one is an easy phrase and a hard childhood. I was the one who fixed things without being asked and got no credit because no one had seen them break. I was the one who noticed at 7 years old that if I stayed quiet and useful, the house stayed calm, and who built an entire self around that discovery before I was old enough to know I was building anything. When my parents fought, I took Bethany to her room and read to her until it stopped, and in the morning no one mentioned it, and the not mentioning taught me that the things I was best at were the things that were supposed to be invisible. Bethany cried at her own birthday parties from happiness, and everyone adored it. I organized the parties. Guess which of us the photo albums remember? My father was not a cruel man. He was a tired one, a man who worked with his hands and came home emptied out. And he loved the daughter who climbed into his lap, and the daughter who read quietly in the corner did not know how to ask for the same thing. So she stopped needing it out loud, and he mistook the silence for self-sufficiency, and self-sufficiency for not needing him. By the time I was 12, we had agreed, without a word, that I was the one who would be fine. "Born with your bags packed," he would say, ruffling my hair, "proud of me in the specific way you are proud of a child you have quietly decided you do not have to worry about." It took me 30 years to understand that being the child no one worries about is its own kind of orphaning. So when I left for the army, I was not running from them, whatever they told each other. I was walking toward the first place that had ever asked me to be exactly as much as I was. The army did not find me cold. The army found me useful and steady and hard to rattle, and it promoted me for the very qualities my family had filed under difficult. That is the part they could never see. The daughter they thought had abandoned them had simply, finally, found a room where the way she loved people, quietly, by holding the line so they never had to know how close the line had come, was not invisible, but the entire point. I joined the army at 22, straight out of college, through the Reserve Officers Program, and to my family that confirmed everything. She left. She always leaves. When I chose military intelligence, when my work became something I was not permitted to talk about, that confirmed something worse. She thinks she is better than us. She has secrets. She has reasons we are not allowed to check. For a while, I fought it. I tried to explain that there were things I could not say, that the silence was not contempt, but law, that a clearance is a set of handcuffs as much as a key. But you cannot prove a negative to people who have already decided. Every time I said, I am not allowed to tell you, my sister heard, you will not tell me. And after enough years, the two sentences became the same sentence in that family. And I grew tired, and I stopped. So I let them believe the small thing. I let them believe I did scheduling, logistics, paperwork. It was easier to be the daughter who pushed paper than the daughter who thought she was too important to explain. I told myself it was a kindness. It was mostly cowardice, the specific cowardice of a person who would rather be underestimated than misunderstood, because underestimation at least leaves you alone. And then my father died. He died in the winter, suddenly, a failure of the heart that no one saw coming, and I was in a place I was not allowed to name. On the far side of the world, running an operation I am still not allowed to describe. When the notification reached me, it came through channels, the way these things do, and I sat in a plywood room with a phone I could not use, in a location I could not disclose. And it took 72 hours to move me to a place from which I could fly. I missed the funeral by 2 days. To my family, I was simply not there. Again, my mother stood at my father's grave with Bethany holding her on one side and an empty space on the other, and the empty space was me, and no explanation I could ever offer would fill it, because the explanation itself was classified. I could not even tell them why I was late. I could only be late. I have never told anyone what those 72 hours were like, and I am not going to tell you most of it either, but I will give you this. When the notification came, I was in the middle of something that could not stop, that would not have stopped for anything short of my own death, and possibly not even then. And I had to keep doing it. I had to keep making decisions, clear-voiced and correct, for the better part of a day, while the fact of my father sat in my chest like a swallowed stone, because the people depending on me had fathers, too, and none of them would have been served by my falling apart. I did the work. I did it well. That is the part that is hardest to explain to a family that believes you did not care. I grieved my father by being unforgivably good at the job that kept me from his grave, because being good at it was the only thing I could offer him from that distance, and he would have understood that even if no one else in the family ever did. He had been a man who worked with his hands. He knew what it was to love people, by showing up to a thing you did not want to do, and doing it right. When I finally reached a phone I could use, 3 days later, I called my mother, and she answered. And there was a silence, and then she said, in a voice I still hear, that I could not even come. Not a question. A verdict already entered. I could have told her I had been awake for most of 2 days, holding a line she would never know existed. I said only that she was right, that I could not. Because the rest was classified, and because I was too tired to fight, and because some part of me had already understood that no answer I gave would be heard as anything but an excuse. That phone call was the moment the story of me hardened all the way through, and I let it, standing in a plywood room 10,000 miles away, because I did not have the strength left to do anything else. You always have a reason we're not allowed to check, Bethany said to me at the reception when I finally arrived in a rumpled uniform that smelled of 3 flights. She was not screaming. That was the worst part. She said it gently, sadly, as a diagnosis. I did not defend myself. What would I have said? I let the silence be the confession they wanted it to be, and I understood, standing in my mother's living room with a plate of food I could not eat, that the story of me was finished, sealed, filed. I was the one who left. I was the one with secrets. I was no one you could count on when it counted. The years after my father died did not repair any of it. They set it the way a broken bone sets crooked if no one is there to align it. I did the things you do. I mailed checks when Bethany's kids needed braces, and the checks were cashed, and no one quite said thank you, because a check from the daughter who could not be bothered to come to the funeral was easy to resent even while you spent it. I missed a cousin's wedding because I was downrange, and the family joked that Adele was probably too busy with her spreadsheets, and I let them have the joke because the joke was easier than the truth, and the truth was still classified. I called on birthdays. I remembered the kids' names and ages when my mother sometimes did not. And none of it counted because it had all been entered, long ago, into a ledger where my column was already marked in a color that did not change. I understood the mechanism, even then. I was the story that let everyone else's story make sense. If I was cold, then the family that had not fought to keep me was not at fault. If I was the one who left, then no one had to ask whether they were the kind of people worth staying for. My absence was load-bearing. Take it away, and the whole comfortable architecture of who was good and who was difficult would have to be rebuilt from the foundation, and no one rebuilds a house they are still living in if they can help it. So the story held because it was useful, and I let it hold because fighting it had only ever made me look exactly as arrogant as they had already decided I was. That is the woman who stepped aside at the badge readers. Not a coward, exactly, just tired. Just a person who had been carrying a thing so heavy for so long that setting it down had become unthinkable, because she no longer trusted her arms to remember how. Here's where the ground began to move, though I did not feel it at first. I walked my mother and Bethany through the unclassified spaces myself, saying nothing about my role, playing the part of a helpful officer, showing visitors a nice display of old radios and a wall of unit photographs. My mother softened as the morning went on, the way she always did once she got what she wanted, and she took my arm and told the other guests that her daughter worked here, in a voice that made working here sound like a small and forgivable thing. Bethany watched me with an expression I could not read. The tour itself was a small masterpiece of the thing I had spent my life inside. I stood in front of the wall of unit photographs and told my mother and sister the sanitized version, the museum version, the one written for civilians, and my mother listened with the patient half-attention of a woman waiting for the interesting part to arrive. At one point, she patted my arm and told a passing family, brightly, that I had worked in this building for a couple of years now, in a tone that placed me somewhere between the woman who ran the gift shop and the man who fixed the copiers. I smiled and let her. There was a photograph on that wall, third row, second from the left, of a change of command ceremony from 2 years before. I am in it, front and center, accepting the colors of the brigade. My mother looked directly at it while she was talking, looked right at her own daughter in dress uniform, holding the flag that meant command, and did not see me because she was not looking for me there. That is the thing about being decided about. People look right at the evidence and do not see it, because they already know what they're going to find. An older man on the tour, a retired sergeant first class by the way he carried himself, did see me. He glanced from the photograph to my face and back, and his eyes widened a fraction, and he opened his mouth. I gave him the smallest shake of my head, the one that means please, not today. And he was old Army and understood at once. And he closed his mouth and gave me a tiny nod of respect that my own mother, standing 18 inches away, entirely missed. A stranger recognized me across 2 years and a photograph. My mother held my arm and called the work forgivable. I had built that. I want to be fair. I had built that with my own 2 hands, one folded silence at a time. We were near the concourse fountain when a young soldier came through the crowd at a walk that wanted very badly to be a run. He was a private, no more than 20, and he had the particular focus of someone sent to find one person in a building full of people and given only a name. He was stopping small groups, leaning in, asking a question, moving on when they shook their heads. I knew what he was doing before I could hear him because I had been that private once, and because the note in my breast pocket had just been joined by a second one, delivered by a runner from the floor 30 seconds earlier, and the second note did not say, maybe. The private reached my mother's group. He was polite, he was also out of breath. "Excuse me," he said, to all of us, to none of us. "I'm looking for Colonel Renner. Have you seen the Colonel?" My mother laughed. It was a light laugh, kind even, the laugh of a woman correcting a child's charming mistake. "Renner," she said. "No, hun, there's no colonel in our family. You've got the wrong name. Try the front desk." The private looked at her, and then, because I had shifted my weight, he looked at me, and something in my face must have answered him. Because his own face went carefully blank in the way soldiers are trained to go blank when they have almost made a mistake in front of the wrong person. He did not say anything to me. He did not have to. I gave him the smallest nod, the kind you give when you mean, not here, not now. And he understood, and he stepped back, and he waited. Across the concourse, near the entry control point, a big man in a duty uniform had gone still. Sergeant Major Curtis Vance had been the senior non-commissioned officer of that building longer than I had commanded it, and Curtis Vance missed nothing. He had clocked the private. He had clocked the private reaching my group. And now he had clocked me, standing in a knot of civilians with my mother's hand on my arm, and I watched him read the whole situation in about 2 seconds, the way he read everything, and start toward us with the unhurried certainty of a man who has decided something needs handling. I took the second note out of my pocket and read it again, though I already knew what it said. It said the floor needed me. It said the maybe had become a thing. It said the phone that rings is yours, and it is ringing. I looked at the restricted lane, at the readers, at the boy with the clipboard who thought I was no one, and I understood that the only way to the floor was through him. My mother felt me change before she understood it. Mothers do. She tightened her grip on my arm, not with affection, but with the reflexive alarm of a person who senses a scene about to occur and has spent her life preventing scenes. "Where are you going?" she said. "The reception is this way. They're about to bring out the cake for the general, Adele. Do not wander off." "I have to go to work, Mom?" "Work." She said it the way you say a word in a language you do not respect. "It's a Saturday. It's family day. Let the staff handle whatever it is. Do not embarrass us by making a fuss in front of all these people. For once, just stay where you're put. Stay where you're put." I have turned that sentence over many times. She did not mean it as cruelly as it landed. She meant, in her way, "Do not leave us again," the old wound, speaking in the only grammar it knew. But it landed as a command from a woman who did not know she had no standing to command me. And it landed on the exact bruise I had been protecting for 20 years, and something in me that had been folded a very long time began, quietly, to unfold. I did not raise my voice. I have never in my life needed to raise my voice inside that building. "I have to badge in," I said. "Excuse me?" I stepped toward the restricted lane, and Specialist Tarrant, the boy with the clipboard, did exactly what he had been trained to do. He saw an individual my mother had publicly identified as no one moving toward a controlled access point during a crowded event, and he stepped between me and the reader, and he put out his hand, palm toward me, and he said, "Ma'am, I can't let you back there. This area is restricted. I need you to step back into the general flow." Behind me, my mother made a sound of vindication, a small, triumphant intake of breath, as if the boy had proven her right in front of everyone. Bethany said my name, once, uncertainly. The crowd near the lane had begun to notice, the way crowds do, turning toward the small friction, the way water turns toward a drain. I looked at the boy. He was so young. He was doing his job, and his job that morning was to believe my mother. "Specialist," I said quietly, so that only he could hear the first part. "I'm going to reach past you and badge in now. When the reader reads my card, I need you to remember that you did nothing wrong." He did not understand. How could he? He opened his mouth to say something about procedure. I reached past his hand and I pressed my badge to the glass. I could have stopped it. I want to be honest with you about that because it is the whole hinge of the thing. I could have leaned in and whispered my rank into that boy's ear and let him wave me through with a stammered apology, and no one in the crowd would have known, and my mother would have kept her afternoon, and the story of me would have stayed sealed. I had done exactly that, in 1,000 smaller ways, for 20 years. I had spent 2 decades making myself the size of other people's ideas of me, because it was quieter, because it kept the peace, because a folded thing takes up less room. But there is a price to folding that no one warns you about, and I had only recently begun to feel it. For the first 18 years, making myself small had felt like a discipline, a thing I did to keep a fragile peace, a choice I could reverse any time I decided the cost was too high. Somewhere in the last 2 years, without my noticing the border, the folding had stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like the truth. I had caught myself more than once at some family gathering, actually believing for a moment the small version of me they saw, actually feeling like the woman who did scheduling, as though their certainty were a weather system strong enough to change the facts inside my own chest. That frightened me more than anything they ever said. A lie you tell to keep the peace is survivable. A lie you begin to believe about yourself is a slow erasure, and I had felt the eraser moving. Standing at that reader with a boy's hand up in front of me, I understood that if I whispered and let him wave me through, I would not just be keeping my mother comfortable. I would be filing one more paper in the case against my own reality, and I had run out of room in that drawer. I was done being quiet in order to spare people the truth about who I was. So I did not whisper. I badged in the way the regulation says to badge in, the way I would have wanted any soldier of mine to badge in, openly, at the reader, with my full credential, and I let the building do what the building does with a credential like mine. The reader did not chirp the friendly green chirp it gave the visitors. It paused. It thought. And then it made a different sound entirely. A low double tone I had heard exactly twice in 2 years. Both times during drills, and the small light above the reader turned from white to a hard, steady red. For one heartbeat, nothing. Then the whole corridor answered at once. Red strobes woke along the ceiling, one after another, down the length of the hall, silent at first, and then joined by a single measured tone. Not a shriek, nothing so cheap as an alarm, but a deep, patient pulse that meant the building was no longer open. Behind the glass doors, I heard the sound I will remember for the rest of my life. The sound of magnetic bolts driving home in sequence. One heavy note after another. Door after door after door sealing down the corridor in around the concourse. A wave of locks rolling outward from the reader I had just touched. Somewhere, a fire door that had been propped for the event sucked itself shut. The unclassified display room sealed, the stairwell sealed. The whole secure spine of the building closed itself like a hand. The crowd went quiet the way a room goes quiet when the power cuts, a held collective breath. And then Specialist Terrence's radio came alive against his shoulder. I could not hear all of it. I could hear enough. I could hear the watch controller's voice, fast and flat, reading a credential authentication, and an access tier and a billet code, and then a pause, and then the tone of a very young controller realizing whose card had just tripped the hold at the visitor lane during a recall, and then clearly the instruction that came back down the net. Terrence's hand, the one he had held up to stop me, dropped slowly to his side. The color left his face by degrees, from the top down, the way it does. He keyed his radio, and he listened, and he looked at me, and when he spoke to me, his voice had gone somewhere small and formal and afraid. "Ma'am," he said, "we've locked down for you." He did not fully understand his own sentence yet. But the building did. A protective hold at a top-tier credential is not a punishment, it is a posture. The building putting itself between the person whose card that is, and whatever it does not yet understand about the moment, and the moment it did not understand was a 19-year-old boy with his hand up in front of the commander because a civilian had called her no one. The building had decided to protect me from the situation my own mother had built. There is an irony in that I have never been able to fully hold. And then Sergeant Major Vance arrived, and the last of the doubt went out of the air. He came across the concourse at a pace just short of a run, a big man moving with total economy, and the crowd parted for him without being asked because some part of every person there recognized authority when it walked. He reached the lane. He took in the boy, the red light, the sealed doors, me, my mother's hand still frozen where it had been on my arm, and Curtis Vance, who had corrected generals, who feared nothing that walked, came to attention in front of me and held it. "Colonel Renner," he said, and his voice carried because he wanted it to carry, because Curtis Vance had watched me get treated like furniture in my own house, and he was not going to let it stand 1 second longer than it had to. "Ma'am, the floor's holding for you. Response team staged. Whatever you need, we go on your word." I have been saluted many times. I have been called by my rank in front of rooms full of people. None of it has ever done to a space what those 2 sentences did to that concourse. The crowd turned, all of it at once, the way a field of grass turns under a change of wind, every face swinging from the sergeant major to me, and I watched the arithmetic happen behind 100 pairs of eyes. The plain officer the old woman had called no one. The doors that had sealed at the touch of her card. The sergeant major standing at rigid attention in front of her. The word "Colonel" landing and landing again. I did not look at the crowd. I looked at my mother. Carol Renner had not let go of my arm. Her hand was still there, the fingers still curled where they had been when she meant to hold me back from embarrassing her, and her face had come apart in a way I had never seen on it in 44 years. Not at my father's grave, not anywhere. Her mouth was open. No sound came out. Her eyes moved from the sergeant major to the red light, to the sealed doors, to my face. And I watched her try to fit what she was seeing into the story she had carried her whole life. The story in which I was the difficult one, the cold one, the one who left, the one who pushed paper, the one who was no one. And I watched the story fail to close around the facts. And I watched something behind her eyes fall a very long way. My mother had told a boy I was no one. The building had disagreed in every language it had. Beside her, Bethany had put both hands over her mouth. She was not looking at the doors or the sergeant major. She was looking at me, and her eyes were full, and I understood that my sister, alone in that crowd, had grasped not just what I was, but what it had cost, all of it, the funeral and the silence and the 20 years, arriving in one image she would never be able to unsee. I turned to Sergeant Major Vance. "Release the concourse holds, keep the spine sealed, and get me to the floor," I said. My voice came out level. It had held together in worse rooms than this one. "Specialist Tarrant." The boy flinched. "Ma'am, you did your job," I told him, and I meant it, and I made sure the crowd heard me mean it. You held a controlled point against an individual you'd been told did not belong there. That's exactly what I'd want from you. Reset the reader and log the hold under my name. None of this is on you. Something in his face broke with gratitude and shame at the same time. "Yes, ma'am." Vance keyed his radio. The strobes died. The deep tones stopped. Along the concourse, the ordinary doors thumped and released, one after another, though the secure spine stayed shut, and the building exhaled around us, and I stepped through the lane that Wesley Tarrant had guarded so faithfully, past my mother's frozen hand, and I walked toward the floor. Behind me, I heard my mother say my name. Just my name. Adele. Once. The way you say a word when the ground you have stood on your whole life has moved. I did not turn around, not out of cruelty. Because the floor was holding, and the floor came first, and for the first time in 20 years, I let it come first, out loud, in front of them, with nothing folded away. The secure doors opened for me now the way they always did. The friendly authenticated click, the quiet green light, the lock withdrawing to let its commander pass. 20 feet earlier, the same system had sealed a building around me because a boy had my mother's word for who I was. Now it simply opened because the question of who I was had been answered in the only court whose ruling the building recognized. I walked the corridor I had walked 10,000 times, past the sealed spine slowly coming back to readiness, and I felt the strangest thing rise in me. Not triumph, not even relief, but a kind of vast and level quiet. The quiet of a person who has stopped bracing for a blow. She has been bracing for so long, she forgot it was a choice. On the floor, my people were already at their stations, and when I came through the door, the watch straightened, not because regulation required it in that room, but because they wanted to. And Kang met my eyes across the consoles and gave me the flat, 2-second brief that told me exactly where we stood. And I stepped into the center of the room and became, again, the still point. No one on that floor had heard what happened at the lane. It would not have changed how they looked at me if they had. In that room, I had never once had to be anything other than what I was. That was why I could walk into it, that afternoon, with my hands perfectly steady, 20 feet and 20 years from the woman who had called me no one. I will not tell you what happened on the floor because I am not allowed to, and because it does not belong to the story anyway. I will tell you that it took a little over 2 hours, that it resolved the way the careful, unglamorous work of a lot of tired professionals usually resolves things, quietly and completely, and with no one outside the building ever knowing it had been a thing at all. That is the job. The job is to make sure the worst days are the days nobody hears about. When I came back down to the concourse, it was past 2 p.m, and the family day was winding into its softer hours, the crowds thinning, the folding chairs being stacked, the smell of coffee giving way to the smell of a floor about to be mopped. My family had not left. I had half expected them to. They were sitting at one of the long tables near the fountain, the three of them, my mother and Bethany's husband Doug, who had missed the whole thing parking the car and had spent the last 2 hours being told about it in pieces. And they looked up when I came through the doors, and none of them knew what their faces were supposed to do. Doug stood up when he saw me, and then did not seem to know what to do with himself. A large, gentle man who sold insurance and had married into a family whose currents he had never fully charted. He had spent the last 2 hours, I would learn, being told the story in overlapping fragments by his wife and his mother-in-law, the two of them assembling it out loud from opposite ends, and the version he had ended up with was mostly astonishment. He shook my hand as if we had just been introduced, which, in a sense, we had. Bethany did not stand. She sat very still with her hands around a paper cup she was not drinking from, and she watched me cross the concourse with the careful attention of someone learning a face they thought they already knew. My mother's eyes were already wet. She had had 2 hours to move from shock into something else, and the something else I could see was not understanding. It was the beginning of a new story, one in which she had always known, one in which this was a wonderful surprise rather than the collapse of 2 decades of her own certainty. I recognized the machinery of it because I had watched her do it my whole life. My mother did not revise stories. She replaced them cleanly and kept no record of the old one. I sat down before she could finish building the new one because I needed to say what I said next while the truth was still standing in the room. Before I reached them, someone else did. Major General Frank Deering had been the senior officer at the event, the 2-star whose cake my mother had been so anxious not to miss, and he was making his slow way toward the exit, trailing aides and handshakes when he saw me and changed course. Deering was a blunt man who had commanded me for a year and liked to pretend he did not like anyone. He stopped in front of me in full view of my family's table, and he did the thing that senior officers almost never do, which is to say a true thing plainly. "Colonel," he said, "I heard the floor held. I heard it held clean." He nodded once, which from Deering was a parade. "Best run facility on this post, and it isn't close, and your people say so louder than I ever could. Whatever happened at that lane today, I want you to know the reason this building works is the officer standing in front of me. Understood?" "Understood, sir," I said. "Thank you." He glanced past me at the table of civilians watching us with open mouths, put 2 and 2 together with the speed that had made him a general, and had the grace to say the next part loud enough for them to hear it. "Your family?" he asked. "My mother and my sister, sir." "Ma'am?" He inclined his head to my mother, a small, courtly gesture, and then he said the sentence that I think finished the afternoon for her. "You raised the officer who keeps the lights on for a lot of people who will never know her name. That's a hard kind of service. You should be proud, though I don't imagine she ever let you see enough of it to be." And he moved on, toward the exit, toward his aides, leaving that behind him on the table like a coin. My mother looked at me. Her eyes were red, and she said the thing I had known she would say, the thing that told me nothing had really changed, even though everything had. "Why didn't you tell us?" she said. Her voice cracked on it. "Adele, why would you let us think? All these years, why didn't you tell us who you were?" I sat down across from her. I was tired in the specific way you are tired after the floor holds, a tiredness that lives in the back of the skull, and I did not have it in me to perform the reunion she wanted. So I told her the truth, which was harder than a performance and kinder than a lie. "I did tell you," I said. "For years I told you there were things I wasn't allowed to talk about. And every time you heard that I thought I was better than you. So I stopped telling you the part I couldn't prove, and I let you keep the part you'd already decided. I didn't let you think I was no one, Mom. You'd already made up your mind about that. I just got tired of arguing with it." She flinched. "That's not fair. We didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I said, and I said it without heat, because it was not an accusation anymore, only a fact that had finished aging. When Dad died and I missed the funeral, I couldn't tell you where I was. I still can't. And you decided that meant I chose the army over him. You decided it at the grave, and you never unchose it, and there was nothing I could ever say, because the truth was locked in a place I couldn't take you. I have carried that for 13 years. I carried it today, while your line was backed up when you told a child I was holding up the people who mattered. She was quiet for a moment, And then she said the thing that told me exactly where we stood. And it was not cruel. And that was what made it land so hard. "I can tell people now, though," she said, and there was something almost eager in it, something reaching. "My daughter, the Colonel. My daughter who runs that whole building. I can tell the girls at church. I can tell your aunt." She reached across the table for my hand. "I'm so proud of you, Adele. I'm so proud." I looked at her hand on the table, the same hand that had curled around my arm to hold me back 3 hours before, and I understood something I had spent 44 years not letting myself understand. That was the sentence that told me what I had always been to her. Not a daughter she needed to know. A daughter she needed to be able to tell. My worth had never been a thing she could see on her own. It had always needed a witness, a rank, a general saying it out loud, a building sealing its doors, something loud enough and external enough that she could carry it to church. The pride she was offering me was real. It was also the same erasure it had always been, wearing a nicer coat. She was not proud of the woman who signed the watch log at 0430. She was proud of the story she could now tell about her. And here's the strange thing, the thing I did not expect. Understanding that did not break my heart the way I would have guessed. It set something down. Because for 20 years I had been auditioning. Every folded silence, every unexplained absence, every check I mailed, and every holiday I worked. Some part of me had been performing for a verdict, waiting for the day my mother would finally see me and say the right thing. And that afternoon she said a version of the right thing, and I realized, holding her hopeful hand across a folding table, that the verdict was never going to be the one I wanted, because the court had never been in session for me at all. She was never going to see the woman. She was only ever going to see the story. So I stopped waiting for it. Right there, I felt the waiting go out of me like breath, and what came in behind it was not bitterness. It was grief, clean and quiet. The grief of finally accepting the shape of a thing you have spent your life trying to bend. And underneath the grief, so faint I almost missed it, was relief. I did not pull my hand away. I let her hold it, but I did not pick up the audition again. "Thank you," I said. "I'm glad you're proud." Both true. And I left it there, and I did not hand her the rest of me to be told about, because the rest of me was not for telling. Bethany found me by the fountain a little later, while our mother was being walked to the car by Doug. My sister had been crying in the quiet, efficient way she cried, and she stood next to me for a while without saying anything, which was not like her, and then she said, "I knew there was more. I always knew there was more, and it was easier not to." "Beth." "No, let me." She wiped her face with the heel of her hand, an ungraceful gesture I loved her for. "It was easier to make you the cold one. If you were cold, then you leaving made sense. And us not fighting to keep you made sense, and me getting all of them made sense. If you were doing what you did today, if you were that, then we lost you for no reason. We lost you because we didn't try. That's a much worse thing to know about yourself. So I didn't know it. For 20 years I chose not to know it." She looked at me. "I'm sorry, not for today, for 20 years. It was the first time in my adult life that anyone in my family had said a true thing to me without needing me to make it comfortable first. I did not have a speech ready. I had never once imagined I would need one. "I missed you," I said, which was smaller than what I felt and truer than anything larger would have been. I missed having a sister. I stopped letting myself because it hurt less, but I did. She put her arms around me, and for a moment we were not the story our family had told, the son and the one who left. We were just two women at a fountain, older than we used to be, finding out it was not too late for the only thing that had ever actually been at stake. She brought up a night I had thought only I remembered. She was maybe 6, she said, and there had been a bad fight, the kind that comes up through the floorboards, and she had been frightened, and I had come into her room and taken her small hand and read to her from a book about a lighthouse until she fell asleep, and I had still been sitting on the edge of her bed, awake, when she woke in the morning. She had never forgotten it. She had spent 35 years, she told me, holding that one memory in a private place, unable to square it with the family verdict that I was the cold one, the one who did not care. and she had solved the contradiction the way children do, by deciding the memory must have been a dream. It was not a dream, I told her. I remembered the lighthouse. I remembered the exact weight of her hand, and I watched my sister understand, in real time, that the evidence of who I actually was had been in her possession the entire time. One true memory, filed under dream, because the truth of it did not fit the story the family needed. We sat with that for a while, neither of us saying much. Some repairs do not need many words. They need only for both people to finally be looking at the same thing. That repair was real. I want to be careful to tell you it was real because the rest of what I have to say is about a door I did not open. And I do not want you to think the whole afternoon closed into ice. It did not. Something opened with Bethany that day that is still open, that we have tended since, clumsily, by phone, on the Sundays when I am not on the floor. With my mother, I did something different, and it is the part I am least sure of, even now, and the part I would defend to anyone. I did not slam the door. I have watched people burn their families down over less than what I had carried, and I understand the impulse, the clean finality of it. But my mother is 71, and she is who she is, and who she is was set long before I could have changed it. And I did not have it in me to make her pay in her last years for a shape she could no longer help. Neither did I fling the door open and pretend the reveal had healed us. It had not. A building sealing its doors cannot give a woman back the mother who might have known her, because that mother was never actually there. So I left the door open a hand's width. That is the phrase I use for it in my own head. I call her. I do not call as often as she would like, and I no longer feel the old guilt about the gap, because the gap is honest now. When I visit as myself, and I do not audition. And if she introduces me to the girls at church as her daughter the Colonel, I let her, because that is her way of loving what she is able to see, and I have stopped needing her to see the rest. I give her the part of me that can be told. I keep the part that cannot. And the strange gift of that afternoon is that keeping it no longer feels like a wound. It feels like a boundary, which is a wound that has decided to become a wall with a gate in it. There was a cost. I want to name it plainly because the reveal is the part people remember, and the cost is the part that is true. Standing at my full height in that concourse, letting the building say what I had refused to say for 20 years, ended something. It ended the fantasy. It ended the long private hope that one day the woman who raised me would look at me and simply know, the way you are supposed to be known by the people who made you. That hope died at a folding table by a fountain with my mother's hopeful hand in mine. I had won. The whole room knew who I was, and the winning is what finally let me grieve the thing the winning could not buy. I would not trade it. That is the last true thing about the cost. Given the same lane and the same boy and the same red light, I would badge in exactly the same way, openly, every time, because a life spent, folded to fit a lie, is a longer funeral than the one I missed. But I will not pretend it was free. Recognition is not repair. It is only at last the truth standing at its own height. What you build on the truth after that is a separate and harder job, and I am still building. People ask me when I tell parts of this whether I forgave her. It is the wrong question, or at least it is a question shaped for a different kind of story than the one I lived. Forgiveness suggests a debt and a ledger and a moment of release. What happened to me was quieter and harder to name. I stopped keeping the ledger. I stopped scoring the game. I looked at my mother across a folding table and understood that she had loved me the whole time in the only way she was able to, which was to say incompletely, at a distance, through a story that had more room in it for her comfort than for me, and that this was both a real love and not nearly enough, and that both of those things would go on being true for the rest of her life. My job was not to fix her or to punish her. My job was simply to stop bleeding into the gap between what she could give and what I had needed. That is not forgiveness. That is something more like setting down a weight you have carried so long that your body has forgotten its own natural shape. I want to say one thing to you now, whoever you are, wherever you are listening to this. If the people who were supposed to know you decided a long time ago who you are, and decided small, you do not owe them a lifetime of shrinking to prove them right. You are allowed to stop folding. You are allowed to badge in at your full credential and let the room adjust, even if the room includes the people who made you, even if one of them is holding your arm and telling a stranger you are no one. Their certainty about you is not the same thing as the truth about you. It never was. It only felt that way because it arrived first, and in a loud voice, and from someone you loved. Stand at your full height. Sign your own name in your own ink. Let the doors answer for you if they have to. And if, when the truth finally stands up, the people you hoped would finally see you turn out to only be able to see the story, grieve that, honestly and all the way, and then set it down. You can keep the door open a hand's width. You can love what they are able to see. You do not have to keep auditioning for a verdict from a court that was never in session for you. I was no one for 20 years because it was quieter than the fight. I am not no one. I never was. Neither, I promise you, are you. My name is Adele Renner. The building still wakes before the people in it do, and I am still the one who signs the log, and I am done being smaller than the truth. Take care of yourselves, and if you have been folding yourself down to fit someone else's idea of you, I hope today is the day you stop, is the